Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
So it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Professor Eric Brewer from UC Berkeley. Eric has been doing a number of really interesting things. One well-known fact is that he's a co-founder of Inktomi, a company, a search company, which I think later bought by Yahoo.
Used to be MSN Search.
MSN Search.
No, very recently.
And more recently, Eric has been very interested in technologies that has to do with devices that people carry around and that people carry all around the world. For example, sensor network is one of his recent interests, for which Eric designed the NESC, which is a programming language for these small devices. And the other passion Eric has is developing technologies for developing worlds, for countries that has relatively poor and a lot of people and the infrastructure is less well established. And in fact, this is the topic Eric is going to talk about in the next hour, is the technology for developing regions. Eric?
Thank you. So this is actually the only talk I give at the moment, pretty much, because I feel that it's important to evangelize this as a viable research topic. So kind of my goal today is convince you that there is, in fact, direct impact that computer science can have on the world problems, that it has a research agenda that's not being addressed, and that it is therefore open for us to address it. And the reason I need to tell people this is, of course, is that that's what's going to lead to getting other researchers to work in this area, to try and start a community down the road, to hopefully allow someone to get tenure based on this kind of research, which I think would be difficult today. This is not a project I would start if I didn't already have tenure. It's too risky. But for my students, and I have some that would like to eventually be faculty and work in research labs, it's important to get the area established and help people understand what it means to do research in this area. So there's a few things I'm going to talk about broadly speaking, but the first most obvious is that the technology today essentially affects a tiny fraction of the planet, maybe 20%. About 65% of the world makes less than $2,000 a year. We'll talk about that group in more detail in a minute. But roughly speaking, if you don't live in the top 10 or 20% of the world's population, Moore's Law has had essentially no impact on your life. The way you live is not that dissimilar from the way your ancestors lived a few hundred years ago. Right? Other than maybe roads, there's not been significant technology impact, and certainly nothing that involves transistors. So this group is called the base of the pyramid. I'll talk more about them in a minute. I do not mean web access for these folks, although there's actually people that do promote that and think that's useful. It is indirectly useful as a means, but what I really mean is directly attacking the problems that matter, which I view as being health, education, government, and commerce. And so it's really looking at how ICT is Internet and Communications Technology, is kind of the World Bank version of the phrase IT that you already know. So that's the first point. Second point, that if you look at the history of these projects, there's a lot of things that are essentially donated computers. And that is a really bad model for lots of reasons. But the basic reason is it's not sustainable and has no long-term impact. You donate some computers, they work for 3 to 6 months, they break, they never get fixed. Right? They become very expensive paperweights, often literally, by the way. So if you're going to have impact, you have to do it in a way that it's eventually sustainable. And I'll talk about 2 ways to do that. But in general, I think the way that's emerged in the last decade or so that's novel is that there is a business environment that means it's possible to do viable entrepreneurial activities that become sustainable businesses. And so we'll call that a non-loss company. And that's a nice phrase. It comes from Muhammad Yunus, who I'll talk about also in a minute. Non-loss company is a company that is not a non-profit, because non-profits are not sustainable per se. Right? They require continuous outside funding. Right? It's also not a for-profit, because a for-profit has stakeholders who care primarily about financial return. Right? So there's a middle group called either non-loss, sometimes called a social enterprise, where it has to be cash flow positive. It has to make enough money to keep itself alive, but its dividends and financial return are not the metrics by which it should be judged. So there's been an emergence of those, so we'll talk about that. And finally, the reason this is a research agenda is because the existing technology is a bad fit, and we'll talk quite a bit about this, but those obvious reasons are it costs too much, it requires too much power, user interface is completely inappropriate on many fronts, including the language and the keyboard, but also deeper things like literacy, like complexity. If you'd never used a PC and you walked up to a modern Windows XP computer, it would be very difficult to make much headway, right? It's designed, correctly so, with an assumption of kind of literally years of computer knowledge, right? Maybe a decade in some sense, because people have been exposed, right? So, in fact, as the virtual technology gets more complicated, it becomes less and less appropriate for people that have not had exposure before. So that's not fundamental. It just means that market forces in the West are not going to solve these problems directly, which is a good place for researchers to step in. So the base of the pyramid used to be called the bottom of the pyramid. People decided that was not politically correct. So now it's called the base. Roughly covers, depending on how you count, 3 to 4 billion people today, maybe 6 to 8 billion in the near future. It is a fast-growing group, which is not good news. Most are still rural, and that's probably good. There's been a lot of urbanization, but in general, urbanization is bad, and if we could make rural life more attractive, that would be a good thing overall. Education levels are pretty low, non-existent, and unequally applied. If a family can send one person to school, it will be probably the eldest son or maybe the second eldest. To the extent that women get education, it's at home or after hours or later in life. That also, by the way, is very much depends on the country. But roughly speaking, it's certainly safe to say it's uneven. Later, we'll find out that women have other advantages that are interesting that men don't have. In general, it's not a single market, so you can't just go in and say, okay, I've got a market of 1 billion people, that should be easy to sell stuff to. In theory, that's true. The problem is that it's too fragmented to make it easy to use just a cookie-cutter approach. And that's a pretty fundamental problem we have to worry about. So to be sustainable, there's kind of two approaches that you can take. The traditional one is actually, of course, public goods, where either through taxation or more likely subsidization from someone like United Nations Development Program or the World Bank, that you do things that are basically public goods. So public goods can be self-sustaining in the sense that if you look at a fire department, it really is self-sustaining in the sense that the society has agreed to pay for it essentially forever. And if for some reason we didn't need a fire department anymore, it could go away. But basically, it's not going anywhere. So there are things that can fit that model, assuming you have a tax base. And it turns out there's lots of places ICT can help in these areas, in fact, in many places, just because it can improve the cost of doing various public goods. Another big factor, which I'll get into a little bit, is that ICT has a big opportunity to be much more transparent than existing systems. And that's good in the long term. It makes it actually hard in the short term because people that are benefiting from the currently corrupt system don't really want to see it change. Got a question?
I look at the really popular emerging market technologies that have come out recently, and they're the phone and the two-wheeler, right? Which kind of fall into a lot of these things, right?
I'll talk about the phone in some detail.
Mobility. And so it's just there's a little, but neither of those things were non-loss companies, right? Neither of those things.
Actually, the phone is a non-loss company. I'll talk about it.
I would argue the phone is a for-profit company, right?
The one I'm going to cover is actually non-loss, but there are also some for-profit ones. In the urban areas, for-profit makes a lot of sense because the density is high enough to cover the cost of base stations. The place you need some cleverness is rural telephony, and that's where the non-loss has been making some progress. And that's also the reason I'll focus more on rural stuff, is that in general, urban stuff is easier and it's more likely to be handled well by corporate interest because there is a large population, it's less fragmented, it's easier to reach, there's less logistics problems, but above all, there's more money. All right, so you'll actually see different cell phone systems for urban and rural because of this. So private projects, they at least need to be non-loss. They could work either by increasing the income of an area, that would be the best case, but they also could be sustainable because they reduce costs. It turns out the supply chain, if you're a poor person, is incredibly inefficient, which means that there's lots of room to make it more efficient, and any technology that makes it more efficient pays for itself. So I'll talk about that in a minute. There's a whole bunch of things that are already being shown to be things people will pay for. Some of them are obvious, and the most obvious one is vocational training. So people will, in fact, pay money out up front to increase the chance of getting a better job down the road. So that's flat out something you can do profitably right now, and it is being done profitably, particularly in Brazil. In fact, there's a group that does Windows training for, I think, 800 different centers in Brazil, and it's quite profitable. Windows is viewed as a skill that you should learn, so congratulations to Microsoft for that. It does need capital. It can be okay to take some capital up front to kind of get your start. That's the same role VCs play in for-profit companies. But ideally, once it's started, it ought to be self-sustaining. Right? So that's kind of the definition. And it turns out you can make profitable companies that will have a huge impact because they can scale by franchising, and I'll talk about an example of that. So I'll give you a few examples of the kinds of projects I have in mind. This one's maybe the most remarkable in the talk. This is a public good example. So West Africa has a long history of problems with river blindness. This covers about 11 West African countries. And someone clever, funded by, I believe, the World Health Organization, basically decided, well, gee, we don't have enough spray to spray larvicide everywhere. So what we're going to do is put out some sensor networks, figure out what are the conditions under which the larvae are spawned, and spray only in those conditions. So using the sensors, you can figure out when and where to spray quite accurately. Does this work? Yes, it does. 30 million people were prevented from having infection. 30 million. Imagine you did your dissertation or something and you said, what's in your abstract? I saved 30 million people. Right? That would be a good PhD dissertation. I would sign that one, no problem. Right? It also freed up the land, which is 100,000 square miles, which is now arable. It was always arable, but it's now farmable. Right? Arable meaning that it could grow crops. Farmable meaning you can farm there without dying. Right? So the land is actually producing food when it was unable to produce food in practice before. Right? So, by the way, it doesn't mean you can feed 17 million of the 30 million people you saved, because most of the 30 million people wouldn't necessarily have died. And of course, all of the 30 million people are productive in other ways. So as a group, it is, in fact, quite self-sustaining. So that's basically a fancy sensor network project. It uses satellites instead of, little mote networks. But basically, it's the same. It's computer science. There's lots of other public good examples. I'll just cover a few of them. Arsenic in Bangladesh is an interesting one, also because I think it's quite approachable right now. This is a terrible. Bangladesh basically has the worst history of any country I know, but there might be some worse countries in Africa, but I can't name one. But basically, the short version history of Bangladesh is huge famine in World War II because the Allies were eating all their food, killed several million people. Huge problems when British Empire left the South Asia, which basically split that empire into India, West Pakistan, which is now Pakistan, and East Pakistan, which is now Bangladesh. And many people were killed, more than 1 million, in that transition, because you basically, if you were the wrong religion, you had to move. You didn't have to, but you did in practice. So that's 1950, right? Then there's numerous problems after that, including some major famines. There was a 2 million kind of death famine in the 70s. There was a cyclone in 1970 that killed 500,000 people. So you think of the tsunami recently, kills 100 and some thousand, right? Imagine if it was 500,000, what difference the outcome would have been in terms of just, so this happened. In fact, there was another cyclone in Bangladesh in 1990, which is not that long ago, that also killed 140,000 people, and you didn't hear about that one, right? I'm not sure exactly why not, but so it's just crazy thing after crazy thing, including independence from Pakistan in 1970, and that had essentially a small civil war. All right, so they're finally on their feet, I would say, as a country, and I'll talk about them quite a bit today because they're a source of hope. But the bottom line is, they do all this stuff. They get help from World Bank. They put in wells so that people can stop drinking the contaminated groundwater, which is contaminated with bacteria. Turns out they didn't dig the wells deep enough. It's at least one argument, due to corruption. Now there's arsenic in the wells, and many people had arsenic poisoning, and now they're telling people, don't drink the water from the wells, even though we spent several $billion putting them in. Drink the water from the ground. It's safer. Right? So a complete mess. And lots of blame being pointed around. But the bottom line is the wells, some of the wells are safe and some of them are not. They try to mark them. There's a green dot if the well's good and a red dot if it's bad, but they're not consistently marked, and in fact the water table changes some, and in fact there's no national information about which wells are good and which wells are bad. So there's lots of easy things you can do with that, including just taking a PDA with GPS and testing each well when they have lots of people, so labor is not a problem, right? And actually getting a national database of where the good wells are and where the bad wells are. So a lot of these things are really simple. Some of them require research, some of them are just apply what we already know how to do. I'll talk about tsunami relief later in the talk just because it's timely, but people should realize that disasters are not going to be rare in these countries. Life is fragile, and every time something happens, a lot of people die. Right? So relief isn't, disaster prevention would be great. It doesn't seem to be happening. Disaster relief is the next best step. A good example is dams. There's been some huge dam failures. Most of them, again, you don't know about. The Chinese dam that failed in, I think, in 75 apparently. I was going to say 76. Killed 85,000 people immediately, and then killed another few hundred thousand over the next several weeks due to disease, the same kind of disease they were worried about after the tsunami. No one in the West knew about it until 1995 because it turns out the Chinese government decided not to talk about it, which is, you can't blame them. But it came up when they started building the Three Gorges Dam, which, by the way, it's a dam that's a mile across and covers a huge set of valleys, three gorges. Right? So a huge dam, and they said, well, what's the chance that this dam is going to break? And of course, the first answer is, oh, it'll never break. It'll be perfectly engineered. This dam broke because it had too much rain. They opened the gates to let the water out, and the gates were plugged with silt. So the dam didn't drain, the water kept rising, and eventually collapsed the dam. Right? So this kind of stuff, because there's not much money for maintenance, is somewhat inevitable. So the World Bank says none of the dams in India are actually safe. And every single one has a large number of people that lives underneath it. Right? In some cases, hundreds of thousands of people. In some cases, a smaller number. Right? So there's tons of opportunity here, including simple things like evacuation notification, like you need to leave. That was not as compelling as I used to think, because it turns out even if you knew you had to leave, there's not the road infrastructure to get 80,000 people out of these valleys quickly. So you could at least get them to high ground, but they couldn't get out of the valley. Prevention would be a sensor network application, which is, can you, using accelerometers, actually figure out which dams are the most likely to collapse? I think the answer to that is yes. The problem is if we're not willing to actually collapse the dams proactively, it's going to be very difficult to know until you have a disaster what the accelerometers tell you. But there's certainly stuff to do there. Switching to private sustainability, there is kind of the two ways you can do it, which is leverage the fact that the supply chain is terrible, or leverage the fact that actually the poor have disposable income. So there's really, these are, I think, both myths. I mean, you ask a company, why wouldn't you sell something to developing regions? Because they don't have any money. Well, that's not really true. In aggregate, they actually have a lot of money because there's many of them. And if you actually could count their assets, like the land they live on, they have a huge amount of money, much more money than is given to them in foreign aid. It's just these assets are what are called dead capital, and they can't take a loan against them. They're not usable in any sense. So with the supply chain first, it turns out everything's expensive. So it's expensive either because the distribution is hard, it's unsafe to get things delivered, particularly to urban slums. Brazil is a terrible example. There's places in Brazil you just can't go. Right? Even my grad student's Brazilian, and he can't go to these slums in Brazil. Right? If you're an outsider, it's just not safe. So that obviously adds a cost to everything that gets purchased there. But if you just look at basic things, credit, medicine, all of them cost 2 to 10 times more than the same stuff for middle class a relatively short distance away, meaning less than 10 miles. Right, so a lot of this data comes from Dharavi, which is an urban slum in Bombay. Water's expensive because it comes in a bottle. Medicine's expensive because you buy it one pill at a time instead of a bottle at a time. This is I call it the anti-Costco effect. When you go to Costco, you get a great price per unit, but you spend way more money than you intended. Right? if your issue is you have little cash, then you buy only what you have the cash for, which means you have to buy very low quantities, but then your price per unit is very high. So a lot of this just comes down to price per unit of low volume, right? So some of that isn't going to be fixable with technology, but I think some of it is. But the bigger picture thing to think about is there's a lot of money already being spent in the system that would pay for technology transparently, right? You don't need new money to be spent to get things deployed. The other is, of course, that they, in fact, have disposable income. All poor people have disposable income, even the poorest of the poor. What they buy, the status symbol changes. This is, if you live in Seattle, you can't afford a house. Maybe you have a really nice car, right? So it's like you definitely have disposable income that that has different kind of levels. So the status item in an urban area might be a bicycle or a color TV instead of a black and white TV, or going down a pressure cooker, right? So for every kind of level, there's a different item. But in the end, it's not 1% of their income. It's actually a substantial fraction of the income goes to disposable things. And what I'll talk about in a minute is Bangladesh. Turns out 7% of rural income of this group, under $2,000 a year, is spent on communications. And we'll talk about why that is. But that's an indicator that they are quite willing to spend money on ICT, and in fact already do. So one of the things that's changed structurally that's very important to understand is kind of the business environment for making progress on the private side. So two things have changed, and one of them is microcredit and the other is franchising. I'm going to talk about them in the next two slides. Microcredit started a few places, Bolivia and Bangladesh. I'll talk about the Bangladesh example. So Grameen Bank, that basically means village bank. Grameen is it's the word actually in several different Sanskrit-oriented languages for village, including Hindu and Bengali. This is Bengali for Bangladesh. Began in one village by this economist, Muhammad Yunus, and he had this observation that if he loaned money to his poor friends, they paid him back. If he loaned money to his wealthy friends, they forgot. Right? And it's just because it wasn't that much money and it wasn't that big a deal. But bottom line, it was an honor to have been loaned money for the poor people, and they took it very seriously and they paid it back quite effectively. So it turns out that he eventually turned this into a bank that had one branch and now many branches. And what's amazing is that now they've loaned out $4 billion, including about $300 million in the last 12 months. So they're loaning out $300 million, but they're doing it at $50 to $200 increments. So think about the number of different banking transactions that is, right? Incredible number, right? A typical microloan would be something like you take out a loan, you buy a goat, you pay off the money for the loan using the milk from the goat. You can't eat the goat, that wouldn't work, right? But if you milk the goat, you can pay back the loan, right? So turns out that people do pay back the loan. This is recovery rate, is what fraction of the loan money comes back. That is better than U.S. banks. It's a very nice number. It's a little bit unfair comparison because U.S. banks could get this number if they wanted to. They choose to get a lower recovery rate in order to take a little more risk and get higher return. So there's a trade-off there. But bottom line is this is an outstanding recovery rate, and any bank would be happy to have it. So people are paying back their loans. So completely profitable. This is not charity, right? They've never taken any money. They just they started with a small amount of money, and they make money on their loans, and they use that to make bigger loans the next time. Now, so you do this for 30 years, and you have $4 billion that you can have loaned out over time. But here's the amazing one. This is the most effective technique I know of for getting out of poverty. 47% of the people that take a loan eventually cross the poverty line. Right? And it's a little bit misleading because it's a self-selecting group that says that's smart enough to take a loan, smart enough to pay it back and make it work. But a typical example is the person that took a loan out to get a goat. They pay off their loan, they say, hey, that worked pretty well, I'll get another goat. And pretty soon they got a small herd. And after that they have a herd and some employees. Right? In fact, the middle managers for Grameen Bank are essentially people that used to be loanees that did very well, and now they actually have kind of moved up this informal hierarchy. Right? So this, of all the things in the third world, this is the number one way to get out of poverty. Take out a loan. Be an entrepreneur. Right? It's much more effective than anything else we've seen. So using that idea, someone very smart named Iqbal Qadir figured out, well, instead of taking out a loan for a cow or a goat, take out a loan for a cell phone. So Grameen Telecom has this model where a woman, and it's always a woman for reasons I might get into in a minute, takes out a loan for a cell phone, and then she operates it as essentially the pay phone for her village. So it's not really a personal cell phone. It's a shared cell phone. The minutes for that phone is about 4 times the minutes of an average cell phone, so it gets a lot of use. She charges per minute, right? So you go to her, you pay up front in cash for so many minutes, and then she's making profit essentially on how much more she can charge per minute than she gets charged. So they've done this 95,000 times, right? $95,200 loans for cell phones, right? So this scales in a way that's pretty incredible. So it covers 50,000 of the 68,000 villages. This, by the way, is the non-loss example. So this is all non-loss here. So this 60 million users, but the way to think about this is, one thing we've learned from this is that this is the way, if you want to reach a lot of people, to do it. It's essentially franchising, much like Starbucks or McDonald's, with one big change, which is franchising the U.S. essentially means the franchisee is providing the capital. And that's one of the reasons you do franchising in the U.S. is to get a source of capital to expand. In this case, the bank is the source of capital using microloans to the entrepreneur. So the capital comes from the bank. You're really just trying to find enough entrepreneurs who are willing to take loans and make the most of them. So this is, I think, unique because I don't see how to get any technology that gets developed out to the 100,000 villages that are in India or the 100,000 villages that are in China without having some kind of franchising to scale it up. So that's an important thing to learn from this example. The other thing to realize is that this is a very profitable business for the phone lady. So it's non-loss in some sense for the phone company, but the phone lady is an entrepreneur and she makes 3 to 10 times the average income of her village. So she's actually relatively wealthy all of a sudden by comparison. In some sense, she has a local monopoly, much like a cable monopoly or anything else, and that's one of the reasons that makes it so profitable. So in fact, once it started taking off, people would fight over who gets to be the phone lady. But it has another effect which is very important, which is this woman, because it's her livelihood, makes the system work. Right? If you look at all the projects that have been deployed in the third world, most of them fail because of maintenance, right, essentially. Right? Something goes wrong and there's no money and no person that can fix it. Right? What happens here, and essentially I think this was somewhat unplanned, is whatever goes wrong, she's extremely motivated to fix it. So in fact, these women will learn the international dialing codes. They will learn how to do battery maintenance and proper charging to extend the battery life. They'll have an extra battery on hand. They know where to get the best reception. They'll even, in some cases, they'll attach external antennas, right? So the regular phone, but has a wire going, crufty wire maybe, but a wire going to get better coverage, right? So this is the other thing we have to learn from this, which is that if you want the system to work in these unpredictable environments, you probably need a human in the loop. And giving that human income seems to be the best way to cause that to happen. Otherwise, you have to predict all the failure scenarios, come up with a plan for each one, right, which I think is in some sense intractable. In this case, we don't know what the failure scenarios are, but at least we know who's going to fix them. Right? And so far, that's been working. I mean, it's worked for a decade, so I think you can call this one successful. I call this works. Agree with that. All right. Question?
Just a couple of comments. First of all, this just shows capitalism works. Right?
Capitalism does work.
Okay. Second, it's interesting to point out, having worked in villages, not in Bangladesh, but in Latin America, it's the women who are at home pretty much all the time, right, or very close to home, because they're taking care of the kids. The men are out working the fields.
That's part of the reason that women take the loans. The biggest reason is that women pay their loans back, and men don't in Bangladesh. And you go deeper into that, why is that? It appears to be a better angle to say is that women that have children pay back their loans because they're investing in their family, and men don't. Women that don't have children don't pay back their loans any better than men that don't, than men that have children or don't have children. Right? So part of the culture is that, in fact, this is the same thing for education. The women that pay for education for their kids often do so at the expense of much personal enjoyment, such as food. Right? So women in developing countries have a long track record of spending money on things that better their life of their kids, and I think that's what's going on here. So
the other thing that occurs to me about this, I don't know if it's significant, The distinction between this and the Grameen Bank model is that this is leveraging a for-profit industry. I mean,
This does leverage.
The telecom industry is a for-profit industry, no question. Grameen Bank is pretty much standalone.
There's actually, I think I have time to cover this, but it goes even deeper than that, because in fact there's two different Grameen phone companies for exactly this reason. There's Grameen Phone, which is actually the one that owns the license and serves middle-class customers. And there's Grameen Telecom, which actually serves rural customers using the same infrastructure. And what's really going on is the pure for-profit Grameen Phone is essentially subsidizing some of the base stations for Grameen Telecom, which is the non-loss company. Right, now those two were designed together, so overall I think that's a fine plan. But they definitely have a for-profit group that is 100% about, competes, bottle license, competes with, Hutch and various other cell phone operators completely for profit. This is the non-loss sidekick in some sense.
So what penalty they might get if they don't pay back the loan? Their children will have some problems?
That's the biggest penalty in practice, it turns out, is that their neighbor in the same village won't be able to get a loan. There's a peer pressure effect going on here. The other thing that works is this is a small town effect, which is that people know who has loans. You know who you're loaning to, the person. I mean, there's a lot of personal history in practice here. But the real practical thing that makes a difference is the peer pressure. And this is something Muhammad Yunus understood very well. In fact, there's a great Scientific American article on this from a couple of years ago, which basically the opening page is about if you really want to group women into 5 and loan to 1 at a time, because the other 4 will put a lot of pressure on the first one to pay off her loan.
2 quick questions about this.
This stuff's all interesting, by the way. Every question you ask me has a crazy answer. I might not even know it yet, but that's very typical of these kinds of questions.
So the first is, if it's such a profitable thing, why isn't there a second phone lady who decides to get her own loan? And
Well, actually, look, there are in some cases 95,000 phone ladies for 50,000 villages.
Okay.
Right, now not all 95, some of them have failed, because like any franchisee, some franchisees won't make it for bad management or whatever. But I believe most of those 95, if you just go by the recovery rate, right, it's 98% plus, then obviously most of those loanees are in fact still in business. So for bigger cities, there are in fact more than one phone lady. It's just when they first put it in, they want to make sure that she can be successful, right? Which is the same thing, that Starbucks used to do. Right, now the Starbucks doesn't need to do that because they don't mind having 4 Starbucks on the same corner. And there is a place, by the way, that has 4 Starbucks in the same corner, on the same intersection.
You're saying the people making the loan...
The people making the loan have some strategy for new areas that is really a temporary local monopoly.
Okay. And the second quick question was, who are these people calling? And is there a network effect? And the more cell phones...
Yeah, so why do people spend 7% of their income on the phone? And the answer is to arrange more money to arrive. That all of these countries have more money coming in from foreign relatives than all of the foreign direct investment. So you think, the U.S. gives $1 billion to some country. That's less than the actual normal inflow from relatives. It's not well known exactly what the flow is. But basically, most of the thing that really pays the bills for the phone is arranging money transfers, usually from the West or the Middle East.
I'm not sure if you're planning to discuss this later in your talk, but if you have any thoughts about whether this model is extensible to higher technologies such as PCs, rural computing stations in villages, for example, I'd love
There's a good evidence that it is the short answer. I'll talk a little bit about it, but I would say that's exactly where we're at. We know it works for phones, but phones are cheaper than PCs. Can you make it work for something more expensive? And the answer is a tentative yes, but there must be a few hundred projects in progress that are trying to do this.
Talk more about that.
I'll talk about it.
That'd be great.
Well, that seems a little bit in conflict with your previous answer, which is that if people are calling to get money, it's not really disposable income that they're spending. It's profitable for them to make that phone call. And so they probably want to spend the least amount of money it takes to get that money to come in. And it's
fair enough, but much of the phone call is not for raising money. So, I mean, if you look at the traffic numbers we've seen for everything, you have good for the phone, it's harder, but for the data networks that are in place, we actually did a trace, and there's all kind. You can tell people doing all the same things that the people do here, right? So it's not like it's targeted use of these relatively expensive computer minutes for just things. So a large part of that is disposable, but you're right, some of it's really not. It's really fundraising. But in general, people have always paid a lot of money for communications. It's just a fundamental human need, and it's not surprising that that's a profitable business. All right, so this example is different because this is one my group actually did. So everything before is essentially motivational, and from here on out, it's much more about kind of what we've done, and then I'll get into the research agenda. So Aravind Eye Hospital is another amazing group. This is in southern India in the state of Tamil Nadu. They just do eye care, and they have 5 hospitals. They treated 2 million patients last year in their 5 hospitals, which is a very large number for 5 hospitals, and did 200,000 eye surgeries. They can do cataract surgery for $10 profitably. That's actually well profitable. In fact, it's cheaper and safer for you to fly to India and have them do your cataract surgery than to get it done here. Why would it be safer? Well, it's safer for a few reasons. The first reason is they do many more cataract surgeries than any doctor does here. Aravind doctor, the best one, does 2,600 surgeries per year. The U.S. number is 200. And the cases that the Aravind doctor sees are much worse than the U.S. cases. So they've actually seen every possible bad case that you could see. It's basically kind of Henry Ford meets medical care. So to do 2,600 surgeries a year means you're basically doing, the best doctors do 5 to 7 per hour. Right? And the way that works basically is they have a swiveling chair and they do this patient, and the second patient's being prepped, and then they swivel the chair around and they do this patient and they swap out. Right? They don't do any bedside manner, because doctors are the limiting resource, by the way. So it just is taking it up a level for a minute. The reason systems people should work on this area is because it's really basically a large set of complicated constraints. Right? They're not the constraints we used to work with, but as a group, we're pretty good at figuring out how to deal at a system level with different weird constraints. So this is just a new set of constraints. It's kind of the high-level message. Back in Aravind, the way to think about this is it's really just Henry Ford. So, you can't afford to have a doctor spend time doing bedside manner, so they train local village women to just do bedside manner and just for one disease. So this woman, who's not a doctor, will know everything that you could possibly ask her about, say, cataracts. But she won't know anything about glaucoma. Right? It's a different woman that has to do the bedside manner for glaucoma. This has lots of benefits, one of which, of course, is that she is a local woman, speaks the local dialect, can relate well, can be trusted by the patient. So it's actually, she's better at bedside manner than the doctors are, and of course there's much, much cheaper. Right? So remarkable hospital. Their limiting factor is that with only 5 hospitals, they're just too far from too many people. So what they want to do is do 110 rural healthcare centers so that no patient is more than maybe 10 kilometers from healthcare. Because beyond that, and certainly beyond 20, they simply won't go. Right? There's some distance above which they won't go until they can't see, and then it's too late. So this is a rural health center, and we've done a lot of work on this one in particular. This is in Ambasu Mudran, which is, I can never say even though I've sent it many times. This is our little link on top, which is a 2.4 gigahertz long distance link. I'll talk more about that in a minute. That's a little router on a pole next to it. And this link's about, I think this link's about 14 kilometers and gets about 4 megabits per second. So I'll talk more about that. But the short answer is this is going to be used for telemedicine, so they can do almost all the stuff in rural health care, and if you need a consult, you'll do it over the video link. And they think that will mean they can treat at least 50,000 more patients per year in the early stages, and maybe 500,000 patients more per year later on. So this just says if we can get them connected, 500,000 people will have better eye care. Right? These are big numbers. They also have a project in computer diagnosis, which is essentially the same motivation, which is this is for diabetic retinopathy, which is essentially degradation of the retina due to diabetes. This is very common in India. Not very common, but relatively common. Much more common than it is here. The issue is it takes a doctor about 5 minutes to look at an image and do diagnosis, and it has to be done by doctors. It only takes them 15 minutes to actually do the surgery, which is a laser surgery. All right. So most people don't have DR, but you still have to look at the images. So the question is, can the computer look at the images and say 90% of the cases and save that 5 minutes for the doctors? Because if you save 3 cases, then they can do 1 more surgery. Right. So the answer seems to be yes. We're only in the mid-80s right now at doing automatic diagnosis, but it's all the classic stuff. It's machine learning with feature extraction, and we train based on graded images from the doctors. And there's tons of data, which is good, because they look at images 2,000 to 2,500 hours per year, right? So you just do the math. If you can save them 2,000 hours per year, and they can do 4 surgeries an hour, 8,000 people per hospital can see, right? That's the outcome of that project if that works, right? That would be good. That would be a good one. So I'm going to move on. The healthcare, by the way, in general, is a good place to use technology because it's easy to make it sustainable. And I frankly don't completely understand why that is yet, but the money is there. The people that pay for, like the cataract surgery at $10, not only is it profitable, but it pays for 2 people because half the people they treat are free. So essentially, the people that pay are subsidizing the people that get treated for free. But even at that cost, they're able to do it. And I can maybe come back to that later, but it's remarkable that they can do it. So big picture, there's many different projects going on around the world, mostly with PCs at this point, but lots of all kinds of other stuff too. And the goal of the research agenda is basically to enable more of these, allow you to do them cheaper and more reliably, and of course, in general, make them better. So we started a project it's complicated, but for the purpose of this talk, we started a project called TIER, which has essentially a 5-year NSF grant. We're about 1.25 years in. Microsoft has actually given us a small amount of funding, so thank you for that. In fact, that's going into social science to do groundwork to figure out what is needed and what's working in India in particular. One of the strategies that's important, besides working with social scientists, is that you really need to work with NGOs in a very deep way. Possibly local governments, but NGOs seem to be the best candidates. So NGOs, non-governmental organization, it's like Sierra Club is here. The reason to work with them is a couple reasons. One is they tend to have a clear mission, such as Aravind Eye Hospital, their mission is to eradicate needless blindness. But for every major issue, like arsenic in Bangladesh, there is an NGO that has got that mission that has a track record. So NGOs have track records. They tend to have transparent funding because they receive money from outside groups like the World Bank. And they tend to have stability. So they're very good to work with, assuming you find the right ones. But they don't trust technologists because too many people have come to them and said, we have the cure for all your problems. Right, and of course it was snake oil, and so after a couple of rounds of snake oil, they're not so trusting anymore. So to combat that, you have to actually go deploy stuff every 6 months and build a relationship. And that's why we're working right now with maybe 3 or 4 NGOs. That's kind of the limit for one group because you can't do 100 of them. You need a relationship. The other thing that's really good about the NGOs, of course, is that from Redmond or from Berkeley, you cannot possibly really understand the issues. Right? You really have to have people that are in the culture, understand the legal framework, understand the actual system, because the systems, broadly speaking, are very complicated. There's a whole bunch of weird things that are going on. Like, for example, electricity is expensive, except that it's not because it's free and the government looks the other way. So if you can get to electricity, you can steal it and no one cares. Right? It's actually more than no one cares. It's that it's kind of baked into the system that they make twice as much electricity as they get paid for. Right? So there's all that kind of stuff that you have to figure out, and that's very much a regional issue. So you need the NGOs to guide you. So when I say co-design, co-deploy, I really mean you give them tools, you help them understand what's possible, and then they have to actually design the application or the use, and then you have to deploy it together, because you need their help both in design and on the deployment. And we're doing all of our work in India so far. We really want to work in other areas shortly.
That's what I was curious about. Why India? I'm just curious.
India is a good choice for several reasons. One reason is there's 250 million poor people there, which is actually more than all of Africa. Right? So if you actually want to go where some of the need is, India and China are 2 candidates. That being said, the poverty in Africa for the people that are poor is much worse than the poverty in India and China. India and China have done a good job in the last 30 years of increasing their poor up a level in some sense. So in fact, those countries, the gap between the West and those countries has closed in the last 30 years. In fact, in general, it's closed worldwide because those two countries have so much population. But if you take those two countries out, Africa's actually fallen further behind. It's just hidden by how well India and China have done. So in some sense, it's easier to do India and China is one answer. There's a lot of people there. India in particular is nice because it speaks English. The south part's safe for grad students. And it has you want a place that has a mix of infrastructure and poverty. So for example, there's a place you can go in Chennai and you can buy 24 dBi antennas. Right? You can buy Ethernet cards and cable. Right? That makes life a lot simpler for getting work done. But after I think we've learned all the stuff we need to learn, we're going to do something in Ghana or Uganda, which is going to be much harder, and that's why we're not tackling it yet. Those are just harder cases fundamentally. So the research agenda. Rural network coverage, which I've talked quite a bit about already. Literacy and UI. There's a whole bunch of stuff to do there, and that actually would be a good place to collaborate with Microsoft. And there's a need for shared devices and infrastructure. The whole Western model of a personal device is essentially inappropriate. If you look at the things that have been successful, they're all shared. The cell phone is shared, and it only costs $25, right? So the chance that you're going to have a personal device is very unlikely. The power is too expensive, and the device is too expensive. And all the projects that have worked have shared devices, either because they're shared at a school or at a kiosk that's shared, or they're literally shared like the cell phone is shared. So you just need better support for sharing at all levels of the system. And it turns out what we didn't expect is power. It's not that we expected to have power. We expected, based on simple things like UN electrification, that if you go into a place that's electrified, that you can then do ICT projects. The answer is you can't. Electricity in these areas was designed for lighting and cooking, and it's very low quality electricity. If you plug a computer into it, or even a cell phone charger, you're likely to blow out the charger in not very long, right? Not a day, but if you left it plugged in for a week, chances are your charger would be fried. Right, so we've seen spikes of 1,000 volts for a 220-volt system. We've seen extended periods of 150 volts that's supposed to be 220 volts. And of course, you see outages both short and long. And so there's actually a need to either make the motherboards much more tolerant of bad electricity, make low-cost systems that will fix electricity, essentially, which is kind of what a UPS does, but we need something that's cheaper than that. And there's a whole nice agenda there, which I don't have time to talk about. But I'll give you one example that's interesting. The biggest problem seems to be, the power's been off all night because you don't leave the power on in the kiosk. Someone comes in, they flip the big switch. And by the way, it literally is a big switch. It's just like you'd expect out of the movies. It's the big switch, you turn it, the power comes on, everything comes on, all the computers don't boot. Anyone guess why they don't boot? The monitors have sucked out all the current and dropped the voltage while the computers were booting, and that causes the computers to hang. And we've seen this many times. Right? So one easy thing to do would be, when the power comes on, don't boot the computer for a minute. 30 seconds even would be enough. Right? There's a simple RC circuit. Hopefully convincing Intel to put that on their Indian motherboards. We'll see if they do it. There's a good chance they will. It's not expensive. But that kind of stuff is going to make a huge difference. Because right now, basically, after they turn the power on, someone goes around and reboots all the machines again. Right? Because they didn't boot correctly. So there's lots of stuff like that to worry about. And this is true, by the way, even for solar systems, which you'd think with their big batteries would have no problem. Solar systems have it because they don't have much current capacity. So again, if you turn on a big draw like a monitor, you turn on all the monitors on at the same time, the current drain on the batteries will drop the voltage. The place we've made the most progress is long-distance wireless. That's the link I showed you. The goal is to get to 50 kilometers or more at $500 or less. I think $300 is the most you could hope for. We're about $800 now, counting basically a router on each end, 2 large antennas. That's most of the cost. And then small components. You need a pole and stuff like that. We're using Wi-Fi because of the low-cost hardware. So I think that the research question is here, can you, with low-cost hardware, get it to work well over very long distances? And there's a few reasons it's not trivial. We fixed about 4 things, which I should have a slide on, but I don't. Sorry about that. So basically the first thing is the MAC layer has to go. The MAC layer for Wi-Fi has several problems. One problem is that it has a lot of round trips, If you have round trips over a long distance, two bad things happen. One is actually the timeout will trigger before the packet comes back. So in fact, over about 10 kilometers with unmodified Wi-Fi, you can't communicate at all because you have timeout problems. If you fix that, you still have the problem that if you have a long round trip, the channel is essentially idle. So you get very low utilization and poor bandwidth. Next problem is you really don't want exponential backoff because you really need to carry voice traffic because voice traffic pays the bills in these systems. And the jitter you get with exponential backoff is much too high to deal with voice well. You want to be able to put two antennas on the same pole because this is really, you're building a mesh network. And that means you need to coordinate their transmissions, called burst synchronization. So you really would like it to be the case that either both antennas are transmitting or both are receiving. Because if you have one transmit and the other receive, even if they're in different directions, the receiving one won't work because it'll get carrier sense from the nearby transmission. So essentially it shuts down transmission. And we were able to trick that using a somewhat humorous trick, which is we tell the card that's doing the second one doing transmission, actually both in some sense because it's symmetrical, you can tell the card to use a different antenna port for carrier sense. So basically you transmit on this antenna, you receive on this antenna, but we don't want to connect an antenna to the receive port. Right? So basically there is no carrier sense ever. And that means you have to go completely through scheduling to make sure you don't have conflict. So essentially we're building a TDMA MAC layer so that we can do low jitter voice, that we can avoid round trips by doing essentially rate-based flow control, and so that we can coordinate the antennas. But the good news is we've been able to do all this just in software, and we haven't needed to modify the hardware. So we get all the advantages of the low-cost hardware without having to take all of the MAC layer stuff. These are also pretty low power networks, and longer term there's a whole bunch of nice things you'd like to do. We're going to try voice this summer, but also there's nice work to do in phase array antennas, which I don't have time to talk about, but if you want to ask me about it later, I'd be happy to talk about it. It turns out they'd be very useful for this application. So here's our new MAC layer. Basically, the way to read this is there's solid lines and dotted lines, and the dotted lines are our MAC layer. And you can see, and this is distance in kilometers, that we're getting much better distance bandwidth combinations. So the one we actually deployed was about 20 kilometers, and we in fact are getting 4 megabits per second. So this is simulation, but our one data point that's deployed is here, and that matches the simulation. So that's a good sign. This is a relatively low-level RF simulation, so I'm hopeful that it's accurate. But this is the nice one. If we really can get 60 to 80 kilometers at a megabit per second, that solves the problem. Right? That will cover all the rural health centers that we need. So we haven't done that yet, and it's not easy actually, because at that kind of distance, the curvature of the Earth is a problem. You need a mountain or a tower. I mean, the towers are $7,000. You can't have a $800 link then on a $7,000 tower, right? So there's some work to do there. But you can use geography to your advantage. So we've done a bunch of links. This is from last summer. I put this one on only because this Nelevadu is a village I'll come back to. It's hard to tell in this picture, it's a bad map, but this is the coastline of eastern India, southeast India, and this is where the tsunami hit. So Nelevadu was wiped out, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But the links are working. We learned a bunch of stuff. Towers are expensive. You not know the topology and the landscape. In this area, the tree line's about 65 feet, and it's a very good RF absorber, which is too bad. So even if you have line of sight between the trees, you really can't get a decent signal through. The Fresnel effect and the vegetation is just too absorbing. So you got to get above the trees one way or the other. So in this case, you can't see it too well, but we're actually on top of the Erevan Hospital with a pole, and that gives us pretty good sight. So you can play games to get line of sight, but you can't just put an antenna wherever you want. You got to think about it. Definitely had some power problems. Changing topics a little bit for a minute. Even if we get the links to work, it's going to be the case you're not likely to have continuous connectivity between 2 points. So if you look at the design of IP, in general, it assumes that everything's fully connected. And maybe there's a little bit of temporary disconnections that you route around, but the normal case is things are connected. Right? That IP just makes that assumption pretty fundamentally. Well, that's not true. It's not true for lots of reasons, but some simple reasons is if the power is going to be intermittent, then clearly the network's going to be intermittent. That's an obvious one. There's things like weather problems in trees where the connectivity varies during the day. You'd like to actually use what are called mules, which is the idea that your network is on a motorbike or bus, and as it goes around, you have coverage around the bus. So there's schools, for example, in Cambodia, where essentially someone on a motorcycle will visit all the schools once a day, and their network is essentially, you can write email, it'll get picked up, and you get the answer the next day, or maybe the day after, depending on the timing, right? That's a very useful kind of network coverage. It's not as good as continuous connectivity, but it covers a much wider area than regular wireless is going to cover. So there's a whole area of research on this called delayed tolerant networking, which is led by one of the people in our group who's at Intel named Kevin Fall. And this actually has had some paper traction. This is the only area I can say that we have published papers so far. And that's because it has overlap with things that other people care about, like communications with Mars, of all things. And we're working for a kind of a Bayou-like storage infrastructure that would correspond with kind of intermittent networking that we're seeing. On the literacy front, I think this is a good place to collaborate. The basic problem, of course, is there's 7,000 languages worldwide, of about which maybe 5 have some kind of computer understanding. Right? So India has 16 national languages and 14 dialects. Right? So I'm sorry, 400 dialects. So if you wanted to actually work with people in their native dialect, you have a lot of work to do. So our approach to this, which I think is in some sense the only one that's even viable, is you're going to have to make speech recognition language independent, right? Which is in some sense an oxymoron. But the way you can do that as long as you have a very small vocabulary. So it's really not language understanding, it's sound understanding. So in fact, as long as you say one of, say, these 30 words, I can differentiate what word you said. But we're not based it on any linguistic structure or any linguistic knowledge. It's just, you just train for the 30 sounds, and then you can pick among those sounds. The good news is you can actually train, what matters is how many different sounds are legal at a given point in the UI. Right? So for example, we have much better recognition if you can choose between yes and no than if you can say any letter in the alphabet of Tamil, which I think has 55 characters. Right? Because you have to differentiate 55 things versus 2 things. So you actually need to design the UI such that you minimize the number of legitimate characters at any time. The good news is this is not a completely new field. This is if you're typing numbers on your cell phone, it's doing exactly the same thing, right? Trying to guess what word you mean out of relatively simple, small number of symbols. So we got that working for digits in Tamil. And I have people in India right now trying it out. So they're doing 2 applications. One is market pricing. So basically, using a speech interface, can you find out the prices of commodity crops? This turns out to be important because if you don't know the prices, you don't negotiate very well and you tend to make less money. Right? Also, you'd like to actually harvest on days when the prices are good because you don't have refrigeration, so you can't store your crops, at least for some crops. Like soybeans you can store, but other crops you don't want to pick them until you know what the price is going to be. And there actually are people that will give you next day futures prices, so you can actually make the decision if you have the information. Now, it's not clear to me that radio isn't a better answer for this, by the way, but
people... Is there any study done to say that the people in these regions prefer to use a natural sound rather than doing the key punch?
There is not. There's not studies on anything. It's the short answer. There's very few studies of any of this stuff. But it is certainly the case that this is not a literate area, right? So keyboard interface is out of the question, right? So maybe icons I could imagine, but your choices are really iconic or speech, right? And I think that's pretty fundamental. We've also got a chip design which I don't think we're going to build, but we're thinking about it. The reason not to build it is that it would be for a personal device, and I just told you personal devices are a bad idea, right? So maybe we can share this as part of a kiosk. That would be different, but if you have a kiosk, you can afford to do the speech recognition in software. So the chip is less compelling than I originally expected it to be. So there's a whole bunch of other challenges, bunch of sensors, packaging, actually working on low-cost towers, which is kind of interesting, that you can make them lower cost if you don't try to hold people up. So basically, it's a pole with guy wires where you can remotely steer the antenna from the ground. Because otherwise, you got to climb up the antenna, and that's too expensive. So that looks like we can do that for $200 for the pole and maybe $400 for the tower. And that'll be 50 feet. So if we can get a 50-foot, $400 pole, that actually is a big help compared to the several $1,000s to $7,000 towers that are used for cell phone infrastructure. And really, the difference is human safety. You just can't have a person climb up it. So lots of other stuff here. And I'll talk a little about the tsunami, and then I'll stop and take more questions. So it's nice to have the questions in line. So this is actually pictures from Nelevadu, which is this village I told you we had a link in. By the way, this is a few things to get from this picture. That upside down wooden boat, that's the boat they go out to fish in. They go out 40 kilometers, right, in this boat and fish and come back, which means it's a multi-day trip because they can't go 40 kilometers with their little two-stroke engine all that quickly. Because of these are fishing villages, one of the things that happened is they need weather information very badly. So one of the projects that we didn't do is they actually put in a system where they'd get a email that had a voice attachment with the weather report in Tamil that someone had transcribed. They'd play it over a speaker system out at about 2:30 in the afternoon, which is when the fishermen are cleaning their nets. So basically it's email played out over many speakers. And since they put that in a few years ago, not a single fisherman has died by being out at the wrong time, whereas before that it was a couple per year. So simple impact, but it turns out it's relevant for another reason, which is, which I'll get to in the next bullet. But so Nelevadu, the village I already showed you a little bit, and where these pictures are from, it turned out they didn't use our link, but they did use the fact that there was a computer center there with a phone, and a former employee who'd been trained in ICT and therefore got a job and left was in Singapore, and he saw the news and called them. So this one village actually had a warning system, right? It was an ex-employee using a phone, and no one died in this village. So it's good. The good news is that if you have a warning system, it actually works. Veraputnam is the village with the loudspeakers, and it turned out it did very well also because they didn't have a warning, but someone there knew after the first wave hit, which killed about 3 people, that there were more waves coming. So by the time the second wave arrived, the beach was clear because of the loudspeakers, right? And actually, the big wave turned out to be the third wave, and when the third wave hit, everything was clear, right? So that was they had to lose 3 lives to get the warning, but at least they saved the rest of the village. And then there's been a bunch of work on ham radios to try and do relief management and find missing persons. But I would say there's already some ICT roles here. And again, none of this was expected. You're using these links and phones for stuff that was unintended. But that's kind of the point. If you put in this communications infrastructure, it can be used for things like this that you weren't expecting. So there's a whole bunch of things that we learned from this. But I would say one big one that news has not gotten right is that tsunami detection is not the most important problem. In fact, the U.S. had detection. It did detect it. The problem is notification. In fact, this is not really new in the sense that if you look at Bangladesh, again, who's had cyclones in 1970, 1990, they actually have a good early warning system. They have, I think it's 3,600 volunteers along the coast who basically, are on a phone list and get called and tell their neighbors, right? So that system is much more important than the detection, and it's completely missing in India and most of the countries on the Indian Ocean. So the one thing that's obvious is that there's technologies you can use for this. Question?
I mean, for notification, it seems to me that television should be the obvious choice.
It's
radio
obvious during the day. At night, it's not. All the emergency broadcast systems have to have some plan for when the primary devices aren't in use. That's really what the volunteers are for. They do, in fact, use radio also in Bangladesh. Not TV, but they use radio. But that's kind of viewed as a hopeful second attempt to contact in addition to the contact list.
I thought the siren, huge siren, they just warm up everybody.
Not in India. There's no notification infrastructure.
That's not even siren.
I don't believe there's sirens at all. And part of it is that there haven't been that many tsunamis in the Indian Ocean. So, it's not completely crazy. But like Bangladesh, because it's had cyclones, has a warning system, right? And after this, the rest of the countries will have a warning system. But there's definitely room for notification systems, for relief, fast deployment relief systems. That would have been very handy. There's no reason you couldn't put down a CDMA 450 base station in under 8 hours and give handsets to all the relief workers. Right? There's been some projects on that in Southern California, but not any that I know of in the developing world. And of course, a whole bunch of basic things, which are essentially eBay-like matching things where we need rice here, we need clothes here, and we have this child that's missing that we can't identify. All that would be great to do on some kind of centralized, disconnected web server, and that's one I think we may actually build. All right. So to wrap up, we're kind of trying all this stuff in parallel. We've got a relatively big group. My group meeting on Wednesday was the biggest ever. It had probably 20 people in it. Part of that's because we have a lot of volunteers because they are motivated by the problem. Part of it's because I can fund 9 from NSF and Microsoft. But I always could fund more. If you had more funding, there's definitely more people that want to work on this. And there's high impact projects to do. This summer, we're really going to look to scale up the number of links, and that actually includes capacity building. So one thing you got to do if you're serious is we actually need to train someone in India how to install our links, because I can't have a grad student install 40 links. That would take forever. All right, so we're going to do some capacity building, and we'll try, it looks like we're going to try CDMA 450, which is a nice thing to try because it's 450 is the frequency, and that lower frequency has much better range than the higher frequency cell phone. So we think using a single base station and our Wi-Fi backhaul, we can give cellular coverage and low data coverage, maybe 64 kilobits, to areas that are not viable now because the cost of the base stations is too high. That's an experiment we'll try. And that's about it. Then I'll take some questions.
Hi,
right.
I'm from Microsoft India. We met actually a while back.
You look familiar.
I'm the lead program manager there. So Anandan Kantaro and I are over there. We are obviously interested in many of these things. We have some other things that are also going on.
You're the converted. I'm preaching the converted.
Yeah. I'm the converted. And there are opportunities, and we've said this a couple times, just for folks inside of MSR. If you're interested in these issues, come to our talk at Tech Fest. I guess that's probably the best piece of advice. And then we're also looking for folks over here to help us. But many of the same issues, obviously, because we're involved in funding this too, we're interested in and have projects.
But I think sometimes the most important thing I think we're doing at the moment is basically discovering problems that need to be fixed for which our community is a likely solve.
Yeah, so
liking solutions.
So in terms of the angle of the lab, we definitely have this. Let's not lead with technology. Let's lead with what are the needs, right? And
No, you have to have social scientists involved because it's too. You can make stuff up all day that's not relevant. It's really hard to know what's actually needed. That's a big contribution, I think.
So going back to the discussion earlier about the comparison between India and Africa, you had said that the people in Africa are poorer, and I inferred from some of your other comments that there's also less of a developed urban infrastructure. Do we get into a chicken and egg problem there? Do we need to develop the urban infrastructure in order to be able to support the spread into the rural?
There's actually, the bigger cities in Africa, generally speaking, have okay urban infrastructure in terms of cell phones. There is not significant fiber infrastructure in Africa the same way there is in India. And that's going to be a problem. There's one fiber going in that will go along Bangladesh, and it may go all the way down to East Africa, sorry. But right now, East Africa, I think, has no fiber at all, and it's all satellite. Even the cell phones, basically, you have a cell phone in a city, it's then uplinked over satellite to Europe to carry the calls. Which is very expensive, $1,000 a month for satellite, just to put that in perspective.
I was chatting with the ambassador from Zimbabwe a few years ago, and he said that one of the other unique things about Africa is that each country tends to have one large city, and it pretty much starves out urban development for the rest of that nation.
I think that's accurate, yeah. So in Ghana, Accra in Ghana has good cell phone infrastructure, has internet cafes, but you go outside of that city, especially in the north of Ghana, it's desolate. Cambodia, actually, a place we have some stuff going on, the same kind of thing. It's very, very different between the rural areas and the urban areas. But that's actually why I think we need to focus more on rural, because the urban areas are being addressed to some extent by market forces.
Now coming back to the phone lady example there, what kind of technical training do they require? I mean, for instance, setting up antenna, obviously not something that they can do that.
Yeah, most of them don't have an antenna. They're using just a normal Nokia handset, bottom of the line GSM phone. So, but they're entrepreneurs. So the ones that figure out that they can get coverage more at the time of the day if they have an antenna will figure out how to install an antenna. It really is. The people are not dumb, right? So they can give an information, which is rare, but if they get the information, they're happy to do the work, and they will invest in it in their business just like any other small business.
Actually, so following on to that, how many of the phone ladies have started to use SMS as opposed to voice? Because
I don't
that
have
ought to be much
statistics.
cheaper for them.
It
But
is,
addresses
well,
better is the problem.
see, but they're not necessarily interested in cheaper. Right? If you're a salesman, you'd rather sell your high-margin product than your low-margin product. So they'll only push SMS, I'm guessing, I've not interviewed them on this topic, if their customers demand it. Right? Because they'll make more money selling minutes.
I guess I was curious whether the phone ladies would know SMS. As
Absolutely. Some
interface.
use SMS for sure. In fact, I think SMS is still widely underutilized for somewhat dumb technical reasons. The technical thing, this is one of the experiments I'm hoping to try with CDMA 450. SMS right now only works if the phone is known to be in range by the base station. Right? So there's kind of a protocol it uses to join the cell, and if it's in the cell, it'll send a message. If you're out of range, to do the round trip, because the limiting factor on range is the power of the handset. It's a very important point. So if you have one-way SMS, which is the common use for lots of applications, you could actually receive it, but the base station doesn't know you're in the cell, so it won't send it. Right? So I'd like to do an application where you basically hardwire which are the cell phones in the cell and then redundantly transmit messages so that you can be very far away. Because we can put a big power amplifier on the base station, right? That's easy because we have power there. We don't have power on the handset. So one way, it's asymmetrical is I guess what I'm arguing, but we don't have no way to take advantage of the asymmetry at the moment because of the way the protocols are written.
You would lose the guarantees if you do that.
But you can't guarantee the message got through. That's why you have to send it multiple times. It's your best guess. This is the same way the paging network works in the U.S. So it's known to be useful functionality. Right? You're not guaranteed to get pages with one-way pagers.
So I heard some products from the telecom companies, the fixed wireless products. I wonder whether those would be, so those are potentially don't have the power constraints, and it's based in someone's house, maybe the phone lady's house.
Yeah, so in fact, when we do kiosks, even with CDMA 450, even though it's a cellular network, the way it will work for kiosks is the kiosk has a directional antenna pointing at the cellular base station. So yeah, if you have a mobile device, your range is going to be limited to something like 10 kilometers. But I'm hoping to get as high, again, as 50 or 80 kilometers from one base station if I have an antenna on the kiosk. So that's absolutely right. And that's something people are not, generally speaking, trying for no good reason as far as I can tell. It makes a lot of sense.
I have a question. So basically with those base stations that you're building, are you trying to, are you connecting them to the standard wireless network, or they're standalone?
Well, we don't have permission to do this experiment. The proposed experiment we'd like to do is a CDMA 450 base station, just one, in the middle of rural Tamil Nadu, because it's got a big flat plain, and you can actually try the distance experiments. Backhauled the voice over IP traffic over the Wi-Fi link that I showed you, except we need to go longer than 20 kilometers, but I think we can do that. And that actually goes to Reliance Fiber. So in India, Reliance in particular there's lots of companies, RailNet, but Reliance has a fair amount of fiber. So if we can get to one of their fiber points, they've agreed to carry the traffic from there to their, essentially, I can't remember the name of it, basically their phone office that does the actual phone exchange. So these would be Reliance cell phones that are essentially free. They're free because it's an experimental license and we're not allowed to charge for them.
So basically, how do you deal with things like interconnection? So once you build one of those stations, it exists only by itself. It's only for its own purpose. It's not connected to...
No, it's connected. We basically backhaul. Backhaul basically means connecting its traffic over a long-distance wireless link into the full Reliance backend. So Reliance is the operator, even though we are deploying the base station as a test. You're actually, for bad legal reasons, you're not allowed to be a phone operator in India unless you already have 230,000 customers. This is a way for the existing operators to keep new operators from entering the market. So we have to partner with a phone operator to carry phone traffic.
But there's a cost of the bandwidth spectrum. They pay for the...
We're going to get an experimental license, so it's free. But that's why we can't charge for the phones. The Indian government would love to see this experiment work. So we can get a license. If it works, we'll have to do something else. But it's just a trial. But we haven't. It's still very complicated. We have to get the base station from one company, handsets from a different company, backhaul from Reliance. You know, it's a complicated proposal. But hopefully by the summer we'll have it sorted out. All right. I think one last question.
How do you plan to make this self-sustaining? Who will pay for these services?
Well, voice is known to be self-sustaining. So voice is one of the few applications. There's a few that we know. Education, healthcare, voice communications, and financial services all have evidence that they are there's enough money flowing through them to be self-sustaining. The problem is, in a rural area, the density is so low that you can't get enough customers in the range of one base station to pay for the cost of the base station. So what we're playing with is how do you make the radius bigger, and that's why the 450 is so attractive. But yeah, it'll be self-sustaining because it's normal voice traffic. In fact, the voice traffic will subsidize the data traffic, because you can charge a lot more for a voice packet than you can for a data packet, which is somewhat doesn't make sense from first principles, but it's in true practice and true in practice. All right, I'll stop there. Thank you much.
Okay, let's thank